Okay, I'm going to call this meeting to order. You'll just continue your conversation later anyway, right? It's true. Yes, probably during the meeting even. Welcome to everyone. So the first item we have is, or the second actually, is the approval of the agenda. You wish to move it, Councillor Bowman? Councillor McLaren will second it. Any additions, subtractions, amendments, elisions? No. Okay. Seeing that, then all those in favor of the agenda passes. And confirmation of the minutes. Anyone wish to move the minutes? Councillor Sanik, seconded by Councillor Bohm. Any problems with the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor? That passes. Disclosure of pecuniary interest. Anyone want to get into fruit farming? No. How about park signs? No. Does Councillor Holland want to get into fruit farming? No. Okay. So not seeing any of that. There's no disclosure of pecuniary interest. Second, apparently there's no delegations. Briefings. Well, there are none. And 7A, Community Orchard and Edible Forest Policy. The recommendation is that the Arts, Recreation, Community Policies Committee recommend Council the approval of the Community Orchard and Edible Forest Policy. Attached to Exhibit A. The Council delegate the Director of Recreation and Leisure Services the authority to enter into license agreements with community groups for the purpose of granting permission to use city-owned lands for the purpose of growing and harvesting of fruit trees, nut trees, and or shrubs, as outlined in the Community Orchard and Edible Forest Policy. Okay, so I think that means, there he is, all ready to go. Mr. Unsworth, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In 2013, Council passed a motion directing staff to investigate and explore edible forest experiences and policies that other municipalities had, and to report back with recommendations. The city staff researched and interviewed key stakeholders in various municipalities, including Toronto, Ottawa, Calgary, Vancouver, Victoria, and Guelph. And stakeholders interviewed were municipal representatives as well as community leaders and experts in the subject matter that were not in the municipality's formal governance. Edible forests and orchards were determined to be largely part of other policies like official plan goals and community garden goals, policies on urban agriculture, and broad-ranging, integrated into broad-ranging policies and approaches. Edible forests and orchards are predominantly community-led projects in all of these municipalities. Community engagement and the location of the orchard or edible forest installation is considered by most municipalities to be very important to the success. In a way, ownership sometimes begets success. Community-led harvesting programs do exist that have very little to do with the municipalities. The harvesting programs extended across public and private lines, finding old abandoned trees in people's homes where they couldn't take care of them anymore, finding trees in old hydro corridors and leading programs to harvest those and enter into agreements to harvest those were very common across a number of different municipalities, Toronto and Guelph in particular. Programs called Hidden Harvest and Not Far From the Tree, again, all initiated in the community realm. We did 2 public stakeholder reviews of the policy that is proposed. We did those reviews in the spring and the fall of 2016, and we consulted with the Community Garden Network, a food council, and we were online doing some public consultation and met with residents and stakeholders at large. We incorporated feedback at each of those stages to finally tune the policy and have received support for what you see before you today. So the purpose of the policy is to provide a framework for the city and the city staff to permit community-led planting, management, and harvesting of trees, fruit trees, nut trees, and/or shrubs on city land. And the things we considered in the policy were that orchard policies and edible forest policies required longer agreement terms than your traditional community garden agreement, just due to the time for the planting of early trees to become, to have a yield for their first and second and third yields. It takes, depending on the species and the size of the tree, whether it's a dwarf or a full-size fruit tree, it can take 6 to 10 years for any fruit to be borne by some of those trees. Some shrubs will bear fruit earlier. Some of the more native shrubs you can find, what there is some interest in planting, will produce food after 3 or 4 years. Site considerations were very similar to the community garden process in that we looked at the environmental history of the land. We looked at the configuration of possible orchard or edible forest planting models. We looked at accessibility for all participants. We looked at the impact that an orchard led by the community would have on long-term infrastructure and park planning. With consideration of environmental history, one thing you'll see in the staff report was that it's a bit different than community gardens, where we can raise the community gardens above the old industrial legacies that are in a lot of our public lands. And the trees predominantly are too large for that to happen, so you will find that no matter what way they're planted, they end up in the ground. So you really have to, under provincial legislation, you have to consider the suitability of the location to support food-bearing trees. The configuration of the orchard was something that was talked about a lot. We found that some residents were very interested in just planting a row of apple trees and harvesting those apples in the fall, and some residents were interested in a much more organic method of planting food-bearing product. That included edible landscapes and shrubs and ornamental plants that would produce food, and mixing those together in a way where sometimes you would get an understory of food-producing plant or ornamental plant that would in a way control weeds and contain moisture and allow those larger fruit and nut-bearing trees to grow up, and not necessarily in a little straight row. So this policy permits all of those things to occur with agreement with a community group. The things from an operational consideration that we had to incorporate into the policy was guidelines to address fruit and brush waste, insects, pests, general odor, fertilizing, pesticide practices, safety, insurance, and what happens if an orchard is abandoned. It's a long-term initiative, and that's something that I'm happy to elaborate on. The policy is very clear that we have the opportunity to hold on to that fruit growing stock for a period of at least a season, and try and promote and use the community garden network to promote getting more shepherds of that land. It's very common that a community group will disband if someone moves away or the interest wanes, and it would be a shame to not be able to reuse those existing growing trees. But at a certain point, if there is no interest in maintaining a community planted orchard, the policy gives the city the responsibility to remove that orchard for public safety reasons. And there is a broad range of orchard and edible forest considerations, such as if someone plants an oak tree, and I know that may not sound like a food-bearing tree to many of us, but there is some sentiment in some communities that oak trees with acorns can actually produce food. It's a very, very specific type of consideration of edible forest, but if someone planted a grove of oak trees and then they were abandoned, if they were planted to appropriate park standards and horticultural and arboricultural standards, the city, while they would have the right to remove those trees after an agreement being abandoned, they're not obliged to under the policy. So it might make sense to keep some. But if it's a big grove of apple trees that require a massive amount of daily maintenance, the policy really requires that the city, for abandoned orchards, have the right to remove them. Neighborhood consultation, as with other community-led initiatives in a park, is important. The city would help facilitate that and support and endorse a proposed orchard location if it met with sort of all the typical tests described before. And again, consultation with the community and the community gardens has been somewhat interesting. There's always a conversation about, well, is it a vote, or do I get consensus, or what if there's one person that doesn't want to do it in the neighborhood? And that's really staff, and in this case the director's responsibility to make those judgment calls. A lot of the time we will get consensus, and that makes it a very easy decision. So there's different types of community orchard and edible forest options available. One of them would be the traditional new orchard or edible forest planting, including permaculture and tree groves of traditional and non-traditional fruit and nut-bearing plants, including trees and shrubs. And for that, you need an agreement, and the agreement is there to outline the responsibilities of the community volunteers and also to provide some protection for them through forms of insurance and ensure that they sort of comply with the policy. Stewardship of existing food-bearing trees and shrubs is another model. This is a good one if someone abandons an orchard. You can say, take it over. We have about 140 different fruit-bearing trees in the city of Kingston on existing public lands. Most of them are ornamental, which means they produce fruit about that big, and really the birds eat it before anyone would make crabapple jam out of it or anything like that. But there are a handful of trees that we expect we may hear from residents on, that they may want to say, I want to steward that tree and bring it back to life and prune it out and put a ladder up in it and use horticultural practices to produce and harvest food. And in those cases, although there are very few of those right now, I suspect over time there will be more, and in those cases an agreement would also be required. And again, that agreement there is to sort of control that practice and protect. And we suspect that those would be good foundations for growing orchards from and making them larger. Now, informal foraging is interesting. You wouldn't expect that we get a lot of requests for this, but we actually do quite regularly get requests for educational programs and for back to earth programs to go out and forage and hunt for food in the urban environment and in our rural parks. You can sort of envision these two little kids are picking mushrooms, and I suspect this is France or something to that effect. But that there is an activity associated with that, and right now that is not permitted under bylaw. The policy endorses this practice, but it's for folks who want to do so at their own risk. So they need to make themselves, and the policy is clear that the folks need to make themselves aware of the possible risks of harvesting food from the land that is either not suitable for consumption for humans, number one, or number two, that is coming from the ground that is not suitable for growing food in under provincial legislation.
Well, thank you. I thought that was interesting. So any questions from the committee? Councillor McLaren?
Thank you. You had mentioned that the possibility of removing orchards for public safety reasons. How is it different from, say, just the normal urban forests? Like, what were those public safety reasons you're concerned about with an abandoned orchard?
Certainly, through the chair, the management of a food-bearing tree requires a different management intensity and practice. There's an effort made in the spring, summer, fall, and there's pruning involved, and there's a certain amount of management of the fruit that comes off of that tree, and that is not recommended to be something that's done by the municipality. And for that reason, it's recommended in the policy that should an orchard be abandoned, and through extensive efforts with community groups, if there's no other group that wants to take it over and do that work, that the city would have the right to remove the orchard. That being said, there are certain types of trees that some community groups may be interested in planting that are not the traditional big old apple tree. The traditional big old apple tree comes with all of that burden associated with it and is not suitable park tree. We don't plant them now. They're not part of our approved tree planting species because of the intensive maintenance and risks that are associated with such a tree. Now, that being said, it is common to hear of people who want to plant oak trees and walnut trees and butternut trees and sort of native fruit-bearing shrubs like a serviceberry shrub. We actually plant lots of those right now in our current portfolio, and they're perfectly fine to sit in the landscape unattended, and they will produce food, although it's usually the squirrels and the birds that eat that food. So if there was a component of a community-led orchard that had those kinds of trees in, then the forestry department would be able to say, well, that's a big bank of serviceberry shrubs along the river. That's totally suitable. They can stay there. We don't need to remove those after the community group has abandoned them. So it will be largely done on a case-by-case basis.
So I happen to have 2 apple trees on my property, and we don't prune them or anything like that. We pick a few apples, and most of them fall on the ground. Am I doing something risky?
I'm not sure I could provide you guidance on risk management on your property, but I would be pleased to say that the experience that we found to be overwhelming in the interviews with all of those municipalities was that the success of the community orchards or edible forest areas was directly proportionate to the amount of ownership and participation by the community group. They worked really, really effectively if they were in neighborhoods where the neighbors were participating and coming out and doing the work. They were very, very successful, and people participated in the harvesting. And so, for the reason of for those reasons, and there is a significant cost to manage fruit-bearing trees. For those reasons, it's led the policy to recommend that this be a policy for community-led orchards and edible forests, not municipally led.
Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess picking up on that point, if we're looking at community, well, it's a partnership, I suppose, in a way that contributes to one of our priorities, which is food security. And so I guess I'm just wondering, like, how, apart from picking up on, like, literally picking up the fruit, but the efforts by different organizations or even individuals, like, who are kind of going off and gathering fruit, for example, like, how can we work in this way, which is like informal partnership, but towards the food security goals that we have as a city, and have the community partners expressed interest in that sort of activity, for example, like, so gathering fruit and sharing it amongst different meal providers, I guess, is sort of what I have in mind.
Thank you, through the chair. We got a good amount of feedback on that exact question from the Food Council. We met with them on one occasion, and then we consulted with them directly on the further review of the policy on a second occasion. We also got a very similar amount of feedback, both on and offline, from the Community Garden Network, which is a partner that already reps a lot of the city program in community garden, in the community garden world. And the direct feedback was to make a number of adjustments in the policy that made it easier, basically, for folks to enter into these agreements, made it less onerous, allowed the applicability of the annual grant to apply to orchards as well, for insurance, covering insurance and things like that, supplies, maintenance, that sort of thing. And so certainly the partnership in the way of promotion for us was to get a policy that was easy to use and not, a policy designed to stop people from doing stuff. It's actually a policy to help allow people to do stuff, because right now they can't and it's not permitted. And I will say that we expect a lot of community-led sort of sponsorship of this sort of subject. And in particular, that's what the other municipalities said. Calgary was a great example. They had one orchard that essentially flew off the shelves. They did some demonstration projects, and they had one that just flew. It was just out overwhelmingly successful, and it was because the immediate community around it took it on as their own. They led the effort, and then they really shepherded it. And they're on like year 6. They did a 5-year review when we started talking to them, so I think they're on year 6 and 7 now. And it's the only one that's booming in Calgary, and they were a leader in this subject. And I think we have to work with our partners to allow them to have a good policy and access to public land in order to let them sort of shout from the rafters that this is something that we can do collectively.
Thank you, that's great. I guess that's exactly what I was sort of thinking, where we are, in this case, providing essentially the trees or the land or whatever, for example, and we have community. It's a great example of how to be sustainable, I guess, in the broader sense, as a city working in partnership with community members who are interested in this type of activity. So it's awesome. Thank you.
That was, okay. It's supposed to be a question. Just say, don't you think? And then you'll be fine, right? Any other questions from the committee? Nobody into fruits and nuts? Okay. I've got a few questions. First of all, just let me say that as a preliminary to my question, thank you for bringing this forward. I think a lot of thought probably went into this, and I'm fascinated by the fact you've been dealing with it for a long time, just as a matter of course. And of course, I sent an email to Mr. Falwell I forwarded one, asking about this just the other day, which I pointed out to him has been going on for years, right? This fruit and nut thing. So my questions are this. Just to be really clear, so it would be advantageous in the fact the policy would only allow community groups like the MPNA or something of that sort to do this, so there'd be some kind of continuity and organization or structure behind it? Is that the idea? Or could people just form other groups?
Yeah, certainly. The definition of community group in the policy is clearly just a collection of a certain number of individuals. They don't need to have a formal not-for-profit or designation, any sort of board or... No, it's just a group of neighbors want to get together and grow trees.
Okay. In the downtown, given the restrictions that you referred to do with provincial legislation, is it going to be possible to do this since there's so much contaminated ground? I mean, it's practically in every yard in the central area. I mean, there might be fruit trees there, but...
Yeah. So I can answer the question because we've been through it a number of times with the community gardens, and at a certain point we recommended in that policy to raise the garden beds to sort of open up many, many opportunities in pretty much any piece of land that was, had the space and the community wanted to do it in. But the trees planted in the ground are challenging. In the urban core of the city, if you took the traffic circle at Kingston Center and sort of worked your way eastward or southwards, there are opportunities where the land has not had previous industrial use that would be suitable for us to explore for tree planting. The closer you get to the old industrial legacy areas, the harder it is going to be. And I think your point is valid that we may have to find places that folks can get to through, bicycling and buses as opposed to walk out your front door, in Dougfleur Park. So I think there is a possibility for us to have it in the city.
Do you do like soil testing? I take it you'd be interested in protecting the city from liability. And public health, of course, but.
Yeah.
So would you have to do soil testing before you allow a garden or an orchard?
Our first goal is to follow the law. Secondly, obviously we want to make sure that our community volunteers are safe and anyone who eats that fruit is safe. And then lastly, we protect the liability of the taxpayer. But certainly we have the ability to assess a site even without doing soil testing and determine that it's viable or it's a go-no situation. So certainly we have lots of mechanisms to help us with that.
Okay. Interlopers, people that don't help cultivate the crop, but eat the crop, free riders. How is that dealt with in other cities? Or, just tell me what you've learned and how that's dealt with, please.
Very, very interesting question. Certainly in some community garden groups, there is a passive understanding that some of their hard work will be shared with passersby. And I believe when you get into the world of orchards and larger food-bearing trees, that sentiment is more common. That being said, there are also community efforts where exclusivity of the produce that comes out so that it can be usually targeted toward a food bank or targeted towards a specific effort is more of an effort that community group will try and undertake, but the policy doesn't allow for fencing. And I suppose one of the things that is a bit effective in apple trees, for example, is that the harvest typically occurs during a fairly narrow window, and there's usually a lot on there. So I think that's up to the community groups to discuss, but we heard both sides of the camp on that one. I will tell you the Food Council was like, free range, eat them all, but then in the same breath they were also like, but wouldn't it make sense to get that food to an appropriate place where, like a food like a Martha's or something like that. So yeah, I think that the community groups and those community-led organizations will definitely figure that out.
Right, thank you. And I wasn't worried about the individual hungry person running by, but our kid, foragers, yeah, right. Okay, I'm done with my questions. Now, anybody on the committee? Okay, so now we're at the section where if the public has questions or comments. So sure, come forward and, yep. Yeah. And what we're going to do, how this works is get out all your questions and all your comments because you only get one shot. It's not my idea of a good time, but those are the rules, okay? So if you got something to say it now and then ask all the questions you can possibly think of. Okay? Thanks.
Hi, I'm Nick Lawn. I'm a community member currently of Oak Street Community Garden, which is located up close to where QECVI was. There's been interest in our community garden for probably more than 5 years for something of this nature, and basically anytime we've talked to city staff, it's been, oh, there's nothing on the books for that. Oh, they're worried about liability. Like, we've basically for years been told, well, we know there's space there. We know you've got a great garden there, but there's no way to possibly do it right now. So I've been to the consults for this, and I'm happy to see progress forward, especially we're talking about sustainability. I feel like it's kind of that first step towards making Kingston an even better place to live. And I do think there's interest and there'd be support in certain spots in Kingston. You were, oh, sorry, you were mentioning thieves and people taking stuff. We experience that already just with vegetables at Oak Street, and it is sometimes a frustrating thing, but I know talking to people, sometimes a lot of people look and say, well, someone was hungry and they got food at the same time, and I think on a larger tree scale, like there's usually more food available, and so it's not really a big concern for us, but I do think, this legislation would really help us be able to kind of get the ball rolling on just another neat aspect of making the community in our space. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Do you want to say something, Frank?
Yes, please, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go ahead.
So, Frank Dixon, Williamsville resident. So, I want to commend staff for the really interesting material that they put together for this. I got here a little bit late. I was at other meetings, so sorry about that. I didn't hear the whole presentation, but I do have a couple of points I'd like to make. I'm wondering if maybe some work could go into looking at at the actual better strains of genetics that we have now compared to maybe orchards that were planted 50 or 100 years ago. We've learned a lot about the biology of how to grow high quality crops, as it were. So I think that has some possibilities. I'm not sure if there's anybody on city staff who has that background, but perhaps there are people out there who can consult on that question if it's deemed to be worthy. And I was thinking that we've got a lot of land in parks up north of the 401 that hasn't been developed, up in Countryside District. I'm not that familiar with the area up there, but I know that past councillors have talked about the fact that parks have been dedicated and nothing has been done on them. So I'm wondering if that offers potential for maybe getting into this in maybe a larger context. I'm glad to hear the Calgary example from our Calgarian. I remember having this being talked about out there. So it's great to have some success to draw upon. And I'm wondering if you've examined other Ontario contexts. You might have actually talked about that when I wasn't here, but if you have success to draw upon, that's good. So again, I want to commend the effort that's gone in, and I'm looking forward to seeing some good things happening.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to comment? Staff wish to respond to those comments and questions, please?
Thank you through the chair. With regards to the first question by Mr. Dixon, plant cultivation, advanced species, cutting edge stuff is really with the community groups. They're the experts in this. We do actually have an in-house expert at the city that helped us with this policy outside of the sort of legal realm, but in the actual horticultural realm, we do have in-house expertise in this matter. But the community groups are doing things that nobody's ever thought of doing. So they're the cutting edge. Cecil Graham Park is a good example. Grass Creek Park is a good example of urban parks that have a lot of space that were former agricultural lands that folks may take an interest in doing planting models on. Could they be done larger than the model proposed in the policy for? The director would have that ability to do that, and it really is dependent upon a community group wanting to make that effort to get out there. We did find from the Calgary example that the remote applications were largely unsuccessful, just because sort of out of sight, out of mind. And the other examples that I didn't cite at the presentation but are in the staff report of interest, and there is a lot of success in this subject matter, but it is a very, very new subject matter. So that's, to some degree, why it's taken a bit of time to bring the information together, is because a lot of folks are just writing their policy. We're actually probably leading the charge on actually writing formal policy on this compared to a lot of those municipalities who are winging it, if you will. But Toronto had a really good community orchard development project called Ben Nobleman Community Orchard. And it went through extensive public consultations. They had to go back 3 and 4 times. The community and the neighborhood was not accepting of the idea of community-led agriculture in that piece of public land. And it took a lot of collaboration to get to a place where the orchard was really given the green light. And then it's been successful ever since. So sometimes they're hard to fit into certain parks. And it's a good lesson that we would turn to if we needed that guidance.
Thank you. Would a councillor like to make the motion? Councillor McLaren, the seconder, Councillor Bone. Any comments or questions from the committee? Okay, so all those... Clerk doesn't want free apples, apparently. Urgency. Okay. Okay, I just want to be clear, I'm not worried about theft too much, but I thought perhaps the people that do the work might be. And I see a nodding head over there. So as long as they can wrap their heads around it, I'm fine. And, you know, stuff is going to happen, but we'll overcome, right? So all those in favor of the motion? It passes unanimously. Thank you. And thank you again to staff for bringing it forward. And as I said before, it looks like a fair bit of work and study has gone into this. So 7B under business, municipal park identification signage. So basically about signs. Okay, so recommendation, the Arts, Recreation, and Community Policies Committee recommend that council endorses in principle, those tricky words, the City of Kingston Park Identification Sign Family as presented in Exhibit A of Report 1607, and council direct staff to proceed with the implementation plan as presented in Exhibit B. Once again, Mr. Unsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The park signage inventory at the City of Kingston is generally aged and reaching its life cycle. We have 200 parks and open spaces approximately. Some are formal parks and some are more passive valley lands and natural lands. The majority of these lands have no identification signs. Any of the existing signs, with a few exceptions, are in poor or fair condition. This new signage program is proposed to identify park name and civic address for all municipal parks and open spaces. The program includes a family of different sizes and types of signs and an implementation plan as to what sign goes where. Which sign goes where. The inventory in the planning and the design process for this project was established, GIS mapped, and determined that we have 48 parks with signs currently. Out of the 200, 41 of those signs are older signs that are, again, in fair to life cycle limited conditions. There's over 150 parks and open spaces that have absolutely no signage or information that would tell you that it's a public park. That we have some newer park signs of varying shapes and sizes in 7 parks. The Lake Ontario Park Revitalized Pylon sign, which has an information display panel on it. Grass Creek Park is a partnership sign with our cultural department to celebrate the Grass Creek Park and McLaughlin Woodworking Museum site. That's also a new sign. The Bill Rob Berryfield Rock Garden site was a response to a formal naming of a park where a sign was done in a heritage village, and it's a very unique kind of wooden carved sign. Bell Park was recently renovated. It's a temporary renovation sign, but it's consistent with some of the practice that's been going on in facilities and parks across the city for the last 5 or 6 years. And then we had 3 And in 2014, in response to this issue, we had 3 pilot project locations established to try out different sizes and colors and textures of signs. One of those was Neil MacArthur Park, which is located in Rideau Heights. Another one used to be called Bryceland Park. Another one is Doug Fleur Park, and then the third park sign where we had a very large pilot sign installed was John Machin Fields Park in the East End. We did a needs analysis of signage in the city and looked at needs analysis in general of signage in open space and parks. And when we considered these things that we're going to speak about, the idea of developing signs and infrastructure in the open landscape really hit home on every single one of these issues. It's very, very different than putting a sign on the side of a building or putting a sign or a piece of structure inside of a space. The scale is very different when you're out in the landscape. The colors and textures read very, very, very differently out in the landscape. And those pilot projects were great exercises to tell us where we could have made changes and done things differently. So we looked at the size and the shape and the height possibilities with signage. We looked at color and graphics and font. We looked at the number and locations of signs that might be appropriate in public parks. Do you put a sign on every single pathway, or do you put one sign in? Traditionally, the signs in Kingston are one sign in every park that has a sign in it. But some parks have a lot of entrances and a lot of street frontages, and some indication of what that piece of land is was considered important, but not every single frontage and entry. Accessibility for people who have challenges reading signs at distances, that's a consideration that you'll actually see a diagram on the bottom right of the screen that shows viewing distances and font heights and sizes that are accessibly compliant with our facility accessibility design standards. And emergency services, we did consult with the fire department, and they were able to connect us to the police department as well. And if someone is in distress, to be able to say, I'm in Halifax Park at 1170 Halifax Drive was something that was seen to be of high benefit. The last consideration in the planning design selection process was trying to determine the materiality of the sign. And this took a lot of effort. And a number of things were considered: life cycle, aesthetics, cost, maintenance, durability, texture, suitability to the park environment, and proprietary considerations. A life cycle is an important thing to think about. We have a number of old signs in the parks that are pushing 40 years in age, and they're old wooden signs, and they have had little to no maintenance in the last 20 years. So it was important for us to understand life cycle, including the maintenance requirements of wood versus steel versus aluminum versus fiberglass versus pressed paper, and a number of different other laminate products. Aesthetic was important. Aesthetic is a very qualitative conversation, and again, in that natural realm in the outdoor space, even in some of our most urban parks, there's a lot of soft green things and a lot of space and a lot of elbow room. And that texture of the natural landscape, it really conflicted with a number of the material choices that you had in traditional signage that you could find on convenience store frontage or something to that effect. So that was also a consideration. Cost was a very, very big consideration. The sign costs of the pilot signs we did were about $2,400 each. So in order to implement the full range of signs, we knew that we didn't want to be facing down a multi-million-dollar budget. And it's a citywide initiative, so it's a very big implementation strategy, so we had to be cautious of cost. Maintenance was in durability and how to deal with signs that get run over in the wintertime, and how to replace signs easily, and how to deal with signs in the long term when a company that makes a specific product goes out of business, and then how to spend public money. You know, a lot of sign technology is proprietary to one supplier. And is that a good way to spend public money? Should you not provide access to all for public projects? So again, proprietary considerations factor into choosing sign materials. The material that was selected at the end of the day was a Douglas fir CNC computer-guided machine routed system with a lot of different sort of modern shapes and sizes, essentially a modern twist on a traditional sign. These are the family of signs that were proposed. What you see in front of you today are the vertical sign, the large park naming bollard, and a small sign. The small sign we actually shopped around in a number of community center locations and took in public feedback and had a suggestion box, and a number of folks gave us suggestions that the sign was a little too low. They were worried they were going to trip over it in the park, or they wouldn't see it from their tall windows of their SUV if they were driving by. So we raised it. Some people said it was a little too short and it just felt out of context, and it did in a lot of the applications. So we in the final design, we've made it longer. This is the prototype. We didn't want to go to the expense of rebuilding it for this purpose, but the other two prototypes are very close to what would be finally implemented. And of course, those details would be resolved as part of the construction process, and there would be a requirement for in situ location by the contractor, and then sort of a review with internal staff to say, yes, that looks right when it's out there in the landscape. The actual large sign is about 10 feet long and has two large Douglas fir planks. That's the extra large sign. And the large sign is a very similar sign, just only 8 feet long. And the medium sign is an 8-foot long sign, but with only one single plank. And then the small horizontal sign is 6 feet long, and it's the same as the one you see before you. We have one other sign type, and it's really more of an identifier marker. It would be similar to the little metal plate that's in the vertical in the bollard sign. And that metal plate could be used on an entry gate to a walkway where it's not suitable to put up a larger piece of infrastructure, but we want to put up a $5 metal plate and have it tell people that this is a piece of public land you're welcome to go to. It's not someone's side yard, which some of them look like. That metal plate is supposed to be painted blue with white lettering. So typical installation considerations are a real soup of different things that get weighed back and forth. We developed a very extensive matrix on these issues, and at least and made an attempt to actually score them, and it was very challenging. But you will see in the actual policy attachment, there's an exhibit for implementation plan that at least explains what the circumstance is for each of these things. Park size, park use type, so is it an active park or is it a passive park? Is it dormant? We have a lot of lands that are dormant. What's the estimated usage? Is this park get hundreds of people a day or one person a year going to it? And that will drive the type of signage, because essentially you want to be able to customize your signage to your customers' needs. The primary park entrances, where were they? Which way did the park face? Parks have front yards and backyards and side yards themselves, and so the configurations of the land was important to consider. How will the signs be viewed from pedestrians and cars? And again, the types of the street they're on will drive sort of scale and proportion-wise and viewability from the speed of the cars traveling and the amount of pedestrian activity versus bicycle activity versus vehicle activity was all considered. There's the length of the street frontages, there's the views into the parks, and surveillance and any conflict with other existing infrastructure. Big pine tree, little view into the park. Park sign was in front of the pine tree. The project is estimated to cost $420,000. We have the budget in place to do a first phase where we believe we can get one new main or primary sign in every park or open space in the city. We would do that in the spring if committee and council endorse this plan. In the future, with future funding, we would be able to install the second signs and the third signs and the walkway block markers and the smaller accessory signs that would go along with this initiative. A typical example, just to finish, is Woodbine Park has a whole collection of different choices of signs. So for example, this is one of the sites where one of the extra large signs would be really suitable. It was to be located at the bottom of the park, right along Woodbine, and it would be a large sign. There are some pseudo entrances off of Princess Street on the top of the park. They're not formal entrances, but they are worthy of promotion of the fact that this is a piece of prominent public land. So they would get a variety of different sign sizes. In this particular recommendation, it would one of the small entry blocks would get a vertical sign, and then the other entry block would get a sign that was a little larger than this one, the medium-sized sign. Along Bay Ridge Drive, there's a number. Is it Bay Ridge Drive? There's a number of beautiful views into the woodland. People don't know that that's public park and public land. Maybe not appropriate to put a big sign there, but some bollards, like the small park identification bollard, will at least sort of tell folks as they're going by. They might have 2 or 3 of those, and that's a piece of public land. So the trick is not to oversign. The trick is not to over clutter the street landscapes, but have that balance.
Surprising end. Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. So did I hear you correctly? You're going to be able to put all the big signs up before July 1st of next year?
Director?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we can certainly look to achieve that goal. We know in principle what we're looking to get. We can procure the services and try and work with contractors to make that happen. That could be part of the implementation plan. We would want to, through our procurement process, to ensure that we were getting good value for that potential increased installation date, but we can certainly try to do that. And I don't think it will be a major task to achieve it.
Okay, sorry, I thought I heard something by the spring of next year.
That's correct, and that's our goal, certainly.
Okay.
We do know that there are a lot of signs. Certainly, minimum 200 is what we're looking for phase 1. So, I think that would be a wonderful way to be part of our celebrations of July 1st, possibly, and across the city on all the other initiatives that are taking place at that time.
Councillor Stanek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, it would be great to get rid of all of the old signs that are around and the ones that are only partial, there. So that would be terrific. So are any of the big signs going to be lighted?
We have one that's identified for a special treatment. It's the Lion Civic Garden sign. It's not identified to be implemented in the first phase. If you're familiar with that sign by the Cataraqui Town Centre, it's backlit with fluorescent tubes. It's actually a functioning, suitable sign right now, but in phase 2, it would be proposed to be upgraded, and it would likely be something different than this, and it would be done in consultation with the Lions group, and it would potentially be lit.
Great. And of the ones in the pilot project that we have out there right now, you said one of the big signs, like in one of the parks, has been vandalized. So which park is that?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I recall saying that, but one of the signs has been vandalized. It's in Doug Fleur Park, and it's been removed, and we'll have to put a fresh sign up. We have the very large sign is in John Machin Park, and it's in good shape. And it's similar in size to what's proposed as the extra large sign in this program. It's a little bit different in massing. There are 2 sizes of signs in Neil MacArthur Park, also known as Bryceland Park in Rideau Heights, and they're also holding up well, and they're similar in mass to what's being proposed.
Was the vandalism more like spray paint? I liked how you said in the report that we considered having raised letters, but that might be easy, to fall off or to someone take them off. So we're doing the engraved ones. I guess those ones are engraved, eh? And so was it more like spray paint, how it was vandalized at Doug Fleur Park?
Yeah, there was a few choices of methods on that particular one. The raised lettering is an outstanding aesthetic, one that was very suitable for a public landscape. We have it at Lake Ontario Park, actually. Those are raised letters on a flat graphic panel. They are high and hard to get at, so they'll hold up long term. The cost is also a consideration when doing raised lettering, other than just vandalism. One of these signs is under $1,000, typically, depending on how big they are, and those are sort of $2,000 to $4,000. So again, it takes a $400,000 program to $1.5 million program quite quickly.
I just have two more questions, Mr. Chair. So if the new signs do get vandalized with spray paint, is the material that we're selecting, is it easy enough, like, is it able to be wiped off with special, substances?
Certainly, painted wood comes with a lot of different options for vandal treatment. One of the options is, of course, power washed off and hope that the paint stays stuck to the wood. Another option is to, if they're heavily vandalized, is to actually replace the panel. Whereas proprietary sign products, metal panels, you got to go to a sign shop, you've got to hire them, order them in, and they can sit dormant for a number of years until that can happen and be budgeted for. So there's some flexibility in having a simple sign product.
And my very last question is, Luke, yep.
Sorry, and just to add to Mr. Unsworth's comments, and one of the reasons is we could completely repaint a sign. Choice was made for the Doug Fleur Park instance. It didn't. It was one of the mock-up or the pilots, and it didn't meet the family that's proposed here. And it was actually in the location of where the KMP trail is connecting. It needed to be removed as well. So there were a number of factors as to why that particular sign wasn't. The graffiti wasn't removed and reinstalled as well. If it had been tagged in the new installation, it would have been cleaned up and repaired in place.
Thank you. So my last question is about the part in the report where you said if it's a park that's sort of part of like a Utilities Kingston pumping station or that sort of thing, then the park won't get a sign. And so it just struck me because at the bottom of our street we have a pumping station and there's Bayshore Park, and I don't want a sign at Bayshore Park, so I'm not doing this to get a sign at Bayshore Park. But do we have a lot of parks that has a park next to a Utilities Kingston? And that's what I read in the report, we're not going to do a sign there. It kind of looks like we want Utilities Kingston to chip in to the price of the sign. So I just wanted to ask about it. So if one of my neighbors says, hey, how come this park doesn't have a sign? I know what to say, but it's not like I want a sign at the bottom of our street at that little park. I just have to ask the question.
Thanks. Bayshore Park does have 2 signs planned for it.
I thought I read that was an example of 2 or 3 others where they weren't going to have a sign because it's shared with Utilities Kingston and it said to be determined later or after more consultation.
Yeah, I think a really good example of that is 3rd Avenue Park. We've had this conversation for about 6 or 8 months now since we met with the community in June about improving the playground in the water reservoir lands known as 3rd Avenue Park by everyone. So we're going to work with Utilities Kingston to coordinate a public land identification circumstance that will work well for all of the stakeholders involved.
And further to the councillor's comment, it's on page 9 where it talks about additional considerations that would need to be reviewed with Utilities Kingston specifically. They've recently gone through, well, not recently, but in the last 6 years, rebranding and additional signage. We wouldn't want to compete with that, but each case will be on a case-by-case basis, as Mr. Unsworth has indicated. In the detailed matrix, we do have some plans in a majority of those locations.
Any other questions? Okay, I've got a couple. I rather like the color scheme. So is this coordinated with the city entry signs, which are also blue and white? More white than blue, I think.
Yeah.
Is that purposeful?
Correct. We have two corporate colors. We have a maroon and a blue, and in the landscape, the actual specific technical corporate colors read very, very differently than they do on letterhead and on the internet. So there are some liberties taken by fabricators when it comes time to actually implement in the landscape. But yes, essentially they're blue and white, and it's an outdoor corporate brand that we're finding is received well and fits nicely into the landscape.
Now, I was in graphic arts trades for a number of years, so I'm wondering what the font is.
Futura.
Futura.
If you look on about 50% of all public buildings in Canada and the United States, started in 1950 to about 1990, you'll see Futura. It is the most prominent public font for public facilities that you'll find. And it's legible for accessibility purposes, and in a way, it's stylistic. And that's part of the graphic that comes across in a sign, is the actual font.
Yes, I think the countersinking didn't help me identify it. The I had another. It does sort of suggest dignity and respectfulness, so that's good. One thing that concerns me about our signs in smaller areas which are not affected by the first stage here, by the sounds of things, if we have the color scheme, I take it that the idea is people will identify them as public parks. Now, there's a number of cases, and this really came up in the waterfront study, right? But it's also in other areas. It seems to me that people don't realize that this is a public piece of land. For instance, the sidewalk behind Frontenac Village, right? People feel, but am I allowed to go there? Now, some people just go through, and other people may go around, and other people just don't know quite sure. We ran across this in a big way along in the waterfront thing on the east side, right? And I don't know, you don't want to create problems where there aren't, well, there is a problem, but you want to solve it in a smart way. But I would like to just put a pitch in here that some places should say public, such and such public trail, such and such public park. Otherwise, there's a tendency for appropriation, not in law, but in fact, right? I know that when the waterfront consultants were reporting, they were talking about a particular place on the area on the east side where even they felt like maybe I shouldn't be here when it was public land, right? And so you're not going to encourage people to use it and reestablish, quote unquote, true ownership unless that's signed properly. And then, you know, I know it'll be a bit touchy. So do you have any plans for that sort of thing? I picked the example of Frontenac Village because it's in my district, right? I'm not trying to pick on the east side, okay? And I just know people don't feel comfortable all the time, and they're not sure if it's public, when it quite clearly is. Do you have any comments on this?
Through you, Mr. Chair, as part of our capital budget in 2017, one of the first initiatives in the Waterfront Master Plan was the wayfinding and promotion component, and that's included for next year. So that is, as was recognized and as a member of the working group, you heard that loud and clear, and that's as part of our 2017 capital budget that we hope to move forward with.
Like I said, I'm not interested in stirring the pot for the sake of stirring the pot, but I do think it's necessary and appropriate. So thank you very much for bringing this forward. It's quite the endeavor. And I have a feeling that staff likes the idea. It's a good thing to do. So anybody else? Any questions? You want to make the motion? Sure, go ahead. Councillor Bohm will move them. Oh, what? Oh, did you want to say something, Frank?
Oh,
in about a minute here, okay?
So once again, I want to commend the thorough report, the excellent organization of the parks organized by district, outstanding there. I think they're very attractive. I think you've got a good family of different signs and shapes and so forth, so that's all really good. Just my one point is sort of following along on what the chair was just saying. I don't see a City of Kingston ID on the park. Like if you have like a City of Kingston crest, for example, that might address sort of, am I welcome here sort of thing. Like it's identified clearly as being a public location. So I was on the Ballpark Working Group in 2014, and Mr. Falwell was running that as the director, and we were designing the new sign for Bell Park, which I think is a bit different than these. I think it's actually metal, but it's got a similar color scheme, if memory serves. I'm not sure if it's wood, but so that's been effective. It cleared things up. It's got the address on it, identifies what's there. So that's all. I think it's got a City of Kingston logo or ID on it as well. So I'd like to see that brought in on all the signs that you're putting in. Now I've got a bunch of points here. Thought about this quite a bit. Some of the points have been covered by questions from members of the committee already, so that's good. Just my one question. I was just walking down sort of along Bagot and McGaffin Park, today as I was looking at the report, and the sign that says McGaffin is actually in pretty good shape. One of the few that maybe older signs that are. So what I was thinking is, I'm in favor of what you're doing here. You want to have them all standardized and carry it through. But I'm wondering if maybe certain signs might, be of value to certain people, and they might be able to be auctioned off for charity. And that would be one example. It's a very popular location, historic. So that's just an idea for that. Thanks for identifying a point I've been talking about for a while. There's so many unnamed parks in Kingston in terms of what they are. Like, maybe they're named, but we don't know what they are when you're walking by there, and a lot of examples about that. So what I'm wondering, though, is if we have any that are unnamed and actual public spaces that are parks that might be in addition to the ones that you have there. So my next point is, actually what I should have said was that I've written all this down, so the clerk might be able to just take my notes rather than write them all down. So I noticed that at Artillery Park, which is really more of an aquatic center and meeting place and fitness spot, you get a different style of sign there. You actually have an LED display, you got the time on it and that kind of thing. So is that a sort of a different program? One question there. And I also at the large sign at which serves at the Lake Ontario Park. It's a different sort of family there. So I find those are very attractive, very effective. So good work there on that. Okay, so my next 2 points are really more questions. What I'm wondering is, this is kind of you're getting after a project that's been needed for a long time, and it's very large in scope, a lot of detail there. But you have a location, say like Woodbine Park, where you've got a lot of different activities going on, or M Center Park, where you have very certain what I would call sub-locations in the park. You have certain diamonds or fields or whatever where things are going on, and those aren't really named or identified either. So that maybe that's sort of a carry-on from the original project. And there might be some possibilities there of naming those sub-locations in honor of maybe certain figures who were instrumental in building, say, the sport of soccer or softball or whatever it is, rugby in Kingston. They could be honored, perhaps by having a diamond named after them. And I guess my final point is, again, sort of extending the concept to the whole area of trails. There's a sort of number of unnamed trails in Kingston. I know you're getting after this with the KNP, right? That's a major project that's going well now, and they'll be identified as they go, right? So I'm just wondering if that might be able to be extended. And I would actually really like to see this carried through and completed in this term of council. I think it would be a really solid achievement that people could relate to. You know, they feel, okay, well, the park in my neighborhood has a sign now, you know, I feel good about that. So, you know, once again, you know, just want to offer my praise for the good work so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Does staff want to respond to those comments and, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll answer some of the comments and pass it off to Mr. Unsworth. In terms of naming of city assets, we certainly have a policy for that, and this would not restrict that opportunity. Normally in our sports field complexes, we have John Mission 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so certainly there's lots of opportunity to name an individual sports field, and our policy allows us to do that. Great point in terms of potentially auctioning off these items. Something that it would be my recommendation, we might not publicize that too much right now, or those signs will go missing before we have that opportunity, but we could certainly work that into the contractor's requirement is to take those down and hand them over to the city at a later time. We could then auction them off. We wouldn't need any further direction from committee or council to do that. We would just factor that in. So that's certainly a good point and been successful for other opportunities in the past. And I'll pass it off to Mr. Unsworth to comment on the other questions.
Thank you. I can provide some feedback on the city logo. I'm very glad that the question was asked. It was one that was wrestled with for a long, long time internally. And I can provide you, and it's in the report, I can provide you the sort of Coles Notes version of why there's not a city logo on these particular signs. I will say that in the proposed sign family, should we have a frontage of a park or open public space that doesn't have a name on it, it's just marking that it's public land, then the logo would become that indicator along with the color and the brand and the sort of general form of the structure. It would become the indicator that it's a public place. So the chair referenced one example that although it's a waterfront example and we have another mechanism coming for that purpose, the walkway block markers do include a city logo. The city logo could very easily be integrated onto the land marker bollard and just saying this is a public place, the low bollard. But the rationale for not including it on every single sign itself was as follows. The name itself, the fact that it says park, implies that it's a public space. There are private parks. But when you couple the name Halifax Drive Park with the font, the style of the product, the color, the format of the materials, which are common from 200 public spaces across the city, it creates a brand that we hope will be recognizable as an indicator as a public place that is a City of Kingston public place. It's a park, you're in the municipality. And it was a very hard conversation to have internally, and I will say that logo went on and off and on and off these signs for months on end. And at the end of the day, the rationale that where there's full information on the sign, in the fact that it's within the city proper and that it meets the branding of the balance of the signs was adequate and didn't provide redundant information. But it was a very hard conversation to have. But certainly the individual bollards and pathway markers would get city logos. The rationalization of formal park names, we do have a formal name for every park in a public open space in the system. Were they all endorsed by council at some point in history? No, many of them are or were formal names, and some of them were working names that came out of a subdivision development or from some mapping exercise 40 years ago. I suspect that when people start to see those names on signs, there may be a further conversation about the name of the park. But right now, a lot of them don't have any sign. Mr. Falwell explained the corporate naming policy for public assets. Trail marking, we do see that major trail systems need signage to direct you where to go. We have recently implemented a trail marking system for the Waterfront Trail, the Rideau Trail, and the Kingston Waterfront Pathway from King Street and Little Cataraqui Creek, all the way along the frontage to the downtown Confederation Basin Harbor. And it's those white signs and logos that have 3 or 4 little logos on. We do have a full sign program coming for the KMP Trail that matches the efforts made by the city in previous years and the KMP efforts by the county. So there's a lot of consistency that's built into that sign system. There are some pathway systems outside of those two that could benefit from having maybe informal pathways or walkways between 2 spaces that aren't necessarily in a public park, that could benefit from having, again, a city logo on either a bollard or on a fence post marker. So we'll certainly look at those. This budget does not include the marking of those short sections of pathway around the city, but we recognize that people want to know where they're allowed to go and feel comfortable. So thank you for that advice. The Artillery Park sign was developed in concert with thinking about the branding and the tone and the color of some of those signs you see up. The Steam Museum, Pump Up Steam Museum, also has a similar kind of box sign. We looked at that sign for parks in general, and we found them to be, a bit larger in scale and cost for actual public park landscapes. But certainly the LED component provides a ton of information to passersby, and Lake Ontario does have that. And the one location that we've identified for an LED display would be in a future phase at the Lions Civic Garden Park. Again, there was a question about the lighting. Right now, there's the letters you put on in there, and they blow off in the wintertime. McGaffin Park is on the list to receive new signage. It would get a larger sign on Montreal Street and a smaller sign on Bagot Street extension. I believe that answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Interesting. Any questions from the committee? No? Oh, Councillor Sannick's got one.
Thank you. My last question is, the report said that the shelf life, like life expectancies of these new signs would be about 20 years. So I know we probably won't be here in 20 years' time, still sitting here, right? But is the idea for the future, you think, if we're all here in 20 years' time, to start replacing them like a few parks at a time? Or will it come, you think, in 20 years' time to this, where we have all these signs that are, broken, torn across the city, and it'll just have to be one big massive expenditure like we're doing in this, to replace them all because they were never really kept current, like in previous years?
Through the chair, we would like to not be in the situation of starting everything at one time. But because of amalgamation and because of the gap with branding from park to park to park, former municipality to former municipality, we do have a legacy, and that's common with a lot of other municipalities from 15 years ago where they were amalgamated. So unfortunately, we are starting essentially across the board from scratch. The conservative estimate of 20 years is conservative. We can't promise that wooden signs will last 40, but there are wooden signs out there that are 40 years old right now. So we would like to see capital life cycle maintenance and ongoing replacement happening, and styles change and fashions change and cities grow and get a different character. So that is likely in many, many years from now that someone will be having the same conversation again.
Thank you. I just had a couple comments. When you were looking at the, sorry? Oh yeah, that's true. Now there are questions, actually. Okay. The clerk's going to allow me to ask my questions. They're very short. Did you look at decals? When you were looking at the signs, did you look at the application of decals of the city crest. You can get decals that'll last like almost indefinitely.
Yeah.
And I happen to have been in the business, and I'm sure they've improved, and they were long-lasting 30 years ago. So I'm just wondering, they could be in color and they'd still be pretty cheap, but they wouldn't look cheap, just on the corner. I'm not saying it's the end and be end all idea. I'm just asking you about that.
We looked at almost every material commonly available in the industry, and some of the materials that were less easy to access, either printed or stamped vinyl and plastic composite material on sign plywood and sheet aluminum was something we looked at. It was a good price. It was not much more than the wooden signs, and it provided some graphic flexibility, but the durability was quite low in comparison to a lot of the other products. And the technology was considered to be more suitable for other types of applications when considering all the considerations of an outdoor park sign.
I guess the question is why?
I think we in the report there's a table actually that's on page 7 that was a good analysis that we were able to provide, where we compared materiality under the cut vinyl or silkscreen model or printed vinyl. We had costs as one of the considerations, which were attractive because they were low or very low. We had aesthetic suitability, and that included consideration of color, tone, durability, and texture. And in comparison to other materials, when held side by side in a public landscape, that didn't measure very well. Durability in a couple of the cases was moderate, and in a couple of the cases was low. And then the technology, we did consider whether it was hard to get our hands on the technology or not. It was not a bad option. Generally, the life cycle or the sort of application that most sign makers will use that technology for is for things that are 4 or 5 years, and as opposed to 40 years. It was just considered to be a bit less suitable. But again, it's weighing a lot of different considerations. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry I missed the thing there. And snow. This is going to get covered in snow. And I like these signs, don't get me wrong, okay? Snow, right? When they're sending out, like John Mason there, right? By the time the middle of the winter arrives, I don't think you're going to be able to see it, right? So it's a little higher in this one, I think, though. And so, snow trumps aesthetics at some point. You can't see it. So I'm just wondering how that works in. Do you just put it on bigger struts or what?
Certainly, that was a consideration that was made. The one that you see in front of you is still the prototype, so that sign will be up a little bit. It's not going to be up significantly higher, but we also know that some of those bigger, larger, or any of our parks are not as used quite as heavily in the wintertime either. So certainly from a sports fields perspective, we're not utilizing that as much. Yes, they are used, and that was something that was part of our consideration and reviewed with Public Works as well. We wouldn't want to put one in a location where it will certainly be covered by the plows going by, so they would be set back in the landscape where we wouldn't typically have the full depth of snow. We also know as the wind blows around it, it will create some drifting and swirling, and it will naturally create a bit of a vortex and keep the snow away from it as well. So all that placement will be part of the actual installation and considerations.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Boehm, you want to move this, don't you? It's yours. And Councillor McLaren will second it. And all those in favor? It passes. Thanks very much, actually. And so we're on to notions of motion in which there are none. Other business? There are none. Correspondence? I don't think there's any. Date and time next meeting is December 8, so not our normal time. Note that, 6 o'clock. And adjournment is number 12. And do I have a mover? Councillor Bohm, Councillor Sanek. All in favor?